What if some of the most powerful stories of faith, sacrifice, and divine intervention were hidden from you? The Books of Maccabees, which contain incredible accounts of perseverance and miracles, were once considered essential readings by many early Jewish and Christian communities. However, today, they are absent from most versions of the Bible used by mainstream Christianity. So, why were these books removed? What secrets do they hold that religious authorities deem too controversial or unnecessary for modern believers? The Books of Maccabees are a collection of historical and religious texts that document one of the most significant revolts in Jewish history, the Maccabean revolt against the Seleucid Empire in the 2nd century BC. These books tell the extraordinary tale of Jewish resistance against forced assimilation and religious oppression. They describe divine interventions, miraculous victories, and the unwavering faith of those who chose death over the abandonment of their beliefs. Despite their powerful message, these books have been excluded from many versions of the Bible, particularly in Protestant traditions. Historically, the Catholic and Orthodox churches have included 1 and 2 Maccabees in their biblical canons, while Protestant denominations do not recognize them as part of their scripture. Even more obscure are 3 and 4 Maccabees, which are found in certain versions of the Septuagint, but have been largely forgotten by Western Christianity. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church uniquely preserves all 4 books in its biblical tradition, maintaining stories that most Christians have never encountered. The decision to exclude these books was not merely a matter of historical oversight, but rather a deliberate theological choice. When Martin Luther led the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century, he and other reformers categorized the Books of Maccabees as apocryphal writings that, while historically valuable, were not considered divinely inspired in the same way as the rest of the Old Testament. Some Protestant scholars argued that these books contained theological ideas that were inconsistent with their doctrines, particularly the clear reference to the afterlife and prayers for the dead found in 2 Maccabees. Beyond theological debates, the removal of these books also meant that powerful narratives of Jewish resilience and divine justice were no longer widely known. Without the Books of Maccabees, modern readers miss out on crucial historical context that shaped later Jewish and Christian beliefs, particularly regarding martyrdom, resurrection, and God's active role in human history. These books offer insights into how ancient believers understood faith under persecution, and how they saw divine intervention in their struggles. By removing the Books of Maccabees from mainstream biblical canons, a vital chapter of history was effectively erased from millions of Christians. Yet, for those who seek a deeper understanding of faith, resistance, and divine miracles, rediscovering these lost texts can open up a whole new perspective on the Bible's message and the resilience of those who fought to preserve their beliefs. In the 2nd century BC, the Jewish people faced one of the darkest and most challenging periods in their history. The Seleucid Empire, under the rule of King Antiochus I of Epiphanes, sought to erase Jewish identity and replace it with Greek culture and pagan worship. Observing Jewish laws, keeping the Sabbath, and even possessing copies of the Torah were outlawed under the threat of death. The Holy Temple in Jerusalem, the sacred center of Jewish worship, was desecrated and turned into a shrine for Zeus. Any resistance was met with brutal persecution. In the face of such oppression, many Jews felt powerless. But one man's defiance would ignite a revolution that changed history. That man was Mattathias, a Jewish priest from the town of Modin. When royal officials arrived demanding that he sacrifice to the Greek gods, Mattathias refused. But when another Jew stepped forward to comply with the order, Mattathias, in a moment of righteous fury, struck him down along with the officer enforcing the decree. This single act of defiance marked the beginning of the Maccabean revolt. Mattathias and his 5 sons, including Judas Maccabeus, fled into the hills, gathering followers willing to fight for their faith. After Mattathias's death, leadership of the rebellion passed to his son Judas Maccabeus, a brilliant military strategist whose name would become legendary. Known as the Hammer for his fierce battlefield tactics, Judas led a small but determined army against the mighty Seleucid forces. Outnumbered and outmatched, the Jewish rebels used guerrilla warfare to weaken their enemies, striking swiftly and vanishing into the mountains. Against all odds, they won battle after battle, proving that faith and determination could overcome even the strongest of empires. The victories of the Maccabees were not just seen as military successes, they were viewed as miraculous signs of divine intervention. Before each battle, Judas and his followers prayed, believing that God would fight alongside them. In one of the most stunning moments of the rebellion, Judas and his forces recaptured Jerusalem, reclaimed the desecrated temple, and rededicated it to God. This event gave birth to Hanukkah, the Jewish festival of lights, which commemorates the miracle of the temple's restoration and the oil that burned for 8 days. The Maccabean revolt was more than just a struggle for political independence. It was a fight to preserve faith, identity, and religious freedom. The courage of Mattathias, Judas, and their followers ensured that Judaism survived one of its greatest threats. Their story is a timeless reminder that standing firm in one's beliefs, even in the face of oppression, can change the course of history. Among the many figures in Jewish history who stood against oppression, few are as legendary as Judas Maccabeus. As the leader of the Maccabean revolt, Judas was not just a warrior, he was a symbol of faith, resistance, and divine intervention. Despite overwhelming odds, he led his people to victory against one of the most powerful empires of the ancient world. His name, which means the hammer, perfectly captures his unyielding strength and determination. After the death of his father, Mattathias, Judas took command of the Jewish forces, rallying his people to fight for their faith and freedom. The Seleucid Empire, led by King Antiochus IV Epiphanes, had imposed harsh laws banning Jewish practices and desecrating the Temple of Jerusalem, turning it into a site for pagan worship. Anyone who refused to submit was either tortured or killed. For many, resisting seemed impossible. But Judas saw no other option. He was determined to restore Jewish identity and reclaim their sacred land. Despite being vastly outnumbered, Judas proved to be an extraordinary military leader. Instead of engaging in direct confrontations with the powerful Seleucid army, he used guerrilla warfare, launching surprise attacks on enemy forces and retreating before they could retaliate. His deep knowledge of the terrain, combined with his ability to inspire fierce loyalty among his men, allowed him to turn small victories into momentum for an all-out rebellion. However, what truly set Judas apart was his unshakable faith in God. Before each battle, he and his soldiers would pray, seeking divine guidance and protection. He reminded his followers that victory did not depend on numbers, but on God's will. In 1 Maccabees 3:18, he famously declared, "It is not the size of the army that matters, but the strength that comes from heaven." His faith inspired his people, and time again, they won battles that should have been impossible. One of Judas's greatest achievements was the recapture of Jerusalem and the rededication of the temple. After years of defilement under Seleucid rule, he and his forces reclaimed the holy site, cleansed it, and restored Jewish worship. This event led to the establishment of Hanukkah, the festival of lights, celebrating not just a military triumph, but the miracle of faith and perseverance. Judas Maccabeus' legacy extends far beyond his victories on the battlefield. He became a lasting symbol of resistance against tyranny and the power of faith in the face of overwhelming adversity. His story continues to inspire those who fight for freedom, proving that even against the greatest odds, belief and courage can change the course of history. Among the many powerful stories in the Books of Maccabees, few are as heartbreaking and inspiring as the martyrdom of the 7 brothers and their mother in 2 Maccabees. This account is one of the earliest and most profound examples of faith in the face of persecution, demonstrating the unwavering belief that God's justice extends beyond this life. Their story not only highlights the brutality of the Seleucid Empire's oppression, but also introduces a theological concept that would later become central to Christian doctrine, the resurrection of the righteous. The tragic yet heroic tale unfolds during the reign of King Antiochus IV Epiphanes, who was determined to wipe out Jewish religious practices and enforce Greek customs. As part of his campaign, he ordered Jews to eat pork, a direct violation of their religious laws. Many complied out of fear, but one family stood firm, a mother and her 7 sons, who refused to break God's commandments. One by one, The brothers were brought before the king, tortured, and executed in gruesome ways. Each was given the chance to save his life by renouncing his faith, but none wavered. They boldly declared their trust in God's justice, believing that their suffering would not be in vain. Their words reflected a revolutionary belief for the time, that those who remain faithful, even unto death, will be resurrected and rewarded in the afterlife. One of the brothers, as he faced execution, proclaimed, "The King of the universe will raise us up to an everlasting renewal of life, because we have died for his laws." 2 Maccabees 7:9. As each son was killed in front of her, the mother did not plead for their lives. She encouraged them to remain strong, reminding them that God had created them and would restore them in the life to come. Her strength mirrored the biblical figure Hannah, who dedicated her son Samuel to God's service despite her own personal sorrow. But this mother's role went beyond grief. She became a symbol of unwavering faith, standing firm even as she watched her children die. Finally, she too was executed, joining her sons in what they believed was the ultimate victory, eternal life with God. This story introduced the belief in resurrection as a divine promise, a concept later echoed in the teachings of Jesus and the writings of Paul in 1 Corinthians 15. It showed that faith was not just about this life, but about trusting in God's justice beyond death. In many ways, the martyrs of 2 Maccabees served as precursors to early Christian martyrs, who also chose death over denying their faith. The sacrifice of the 7 brothers and their mother remains one of the most powerful examples of faith under persecution. Their story reminds us that true devotion often comes with a price, but for those who believe, suffering is not the end, it is the path to something greater. The story of the Maccabean revolt is not just one of military strategy and perseverance. It is also a tale of divine intervention. Throughout the battles against the Seleucid Empire, the Jewish forces, led by Judas Maccabeus, faced overwhelming odds. Yet time and time again, they emerged victorious, often in ways that seemed impossible. The Books of Maccabees recount numerous moments where supernatural forces played a decisive role, reinforcing the belief that God was fighting alongside his people. One of the most astonishing miracles recorded in 2 Maccabees occurred during the Battle of Beth Zur. Judas and his army were vastly outnumbered by the Seleucid forces, who were determined to crush the rebellion once and for all. As the battle seemed lost, something extraordinary happened. 5 angelic warriors, riding on horseback with golden bridles, appeared on the battlefield. These divine beings did not merely observe the fight. They actively protected Judas and his men, shielding them from harm. The angels rained arrows and lightning upon the enemy, throwing them into confusion and turning the tide of battle. What seemed like certain defeat became a miraculous victory. This intervention mirrors other moments in biblical history where God sent his heavenly forces to aid his people. In 2 Kings 6:17, when the prophet Elisha's servant was terrified by an approaching enemy army, Elisha prayed for his eyes to be opened. The servant suddenly saw the hills filled with chariots of fire, revealing that God's army was always present, even when unseen. Similarly, in the book of Joshua 5:13-15, a divine warrior appeared before Joshua, confirming that God was leading Israel into battle. These moments in 2 Maccabees reinforce the idea that the Maccabean revolt was not just a human struggle, but a battle ordained by God himself. Another miraculous vision occurred when Judas Maccabeus received a divine gift from the prophet Jeremiah. On the eve of an important battle, Judas had a vision where Jeremiah handed him a golden sword, assuring him that God had chosen him to lead his people to victory. This moment echoed biblical encounters with divine messengers, such as when God commanded Gideon to rise up against the Midianites in Judges 6, or when the angel of the Lord strengthened Joshua before the conquest of Canaan. With renewed confidence, Judas led his troops to another stunning victory. The miracles in 2 Maccabees were not just about winning battles. They were reminders that faith and righteousness invite divine protection. These stories reinforce the idea that those who trust in God, even against impossible odds, are never truly alone. Whether through angelic warriors or prophetic visions, The message was clear. God was fighting alongside his people, ensuring their survival and their faith would endure. While the first two books of Maccabees focus on the Jewish struggle against the Seleucid Empire in Judea, 3 Maccabees tells a different yet equally astonishing story, one of divine intervention and survival in a foreign land. Unlike the heroic battles led by Judas Maccabeus, this book describes how the Jewish people in Egypt faced oppression, not on the battlefield, but in the political arena. Through their faith and unwavering prayers, they witnessed a miraculous deliverance that defied all human expectations. The story takes place during the reign of Ptolemy IV Philopator, the ruler of Egypt after his victory over the Seleucid king Antiochus IIII. Drunk with power, Ptolemy sought to assert his dominance not only through military conquest, but also by disrespecting the Jewish faith. Fresh from his triumph, he traveled to Jerusalem and attempted to force his way into the Holy of Holies, the most sacred part of the temple, where only the Jewish high priest was permitted to enter. This act was a direct insult to Jewish religious laws and a sign of his arrogance. However, as Ptolemy IV attempted to desecrate the temple, something extraordinary happened. God struck him down with paralysis and blindness, preventing him from entering the sacred space. Humiliated and enraged, the king returned to Egypt, where his anger turned toward the Jewish population living in Alexandria. He devised a brutal plan. All Jews in Egypt were to be rounded up and marked for execution. His method of extermination was particularly cruel. He ordered that thousands of Jewish men, women, and children be trampled to death by elephants in a public spectacle. Faced with imminent death, the Jewish people did not turn to weapons or military resistance. Instead, they turned to prayer and fasting, placing their trust entirely in God's power to deliver them. Their response echoed the actions of Queen Esther, who called for a fast before risking her life to save her people from Haman's genocidal plot. It also reflected King Jehoshaphat's approach in 2 Chronicles 20, where he called for national prayer when Judah faced invasion. At the very moment when Ptolemy's soldiers prepared to unleash the elephants, God intervened in a way that no one could have predicted. The animals, instead of attacking the Jewish prisoners, suddenly turned on their handlers and the Egyptian soldiers, trampling them instead. Chaos erupted, and the plan to exterminate the Jews completely fell apart. Seeing this supernatural reversal, Ptolemy was forced to abandon his decree and even granted the Jewish people the freedom to practice their faith without interference. The events in 3 Maccabees serve as a powerful reminder that God's protection is not limited to one land or one people. Whether in Judea, Egypt, or any other foreign nation, those who remain faithful will always find his presence and power at work. The Jewish people in Egypt did not win through military strength, but through faith, perseverance, and the miraculous hand of God. The books of Maccabees tell stories of faith, resistance, and divine intervention in the face of overwhelming persecution. Whether through the military victories of Judas Maccabeus, the martyrdom of the 7 brothers, or the miraculous deliverance of the Jews in Egypt, each account reinforces the idea that those who remain faithful to God will never stand alone. Across different times and places, the Jewish people faced powerful enemies who sought to erase their faith and identity. But through courage and trust in God, they survived against all odds. One of the most powerful themes in these books is the idea that faith requires sacrifice. The Jewish people during the reign of Antiochus IV Epiphanes and Ptolemy IV Philopator were forced to choose between their beliefs and their lives. Many, like the 7 brothers in 2 Maccabees, embraced death rather than betray their faith, believing in the promise of resurrection. Others, like Judas Maccabeus, took up arms to defend their sacred traditions. In both cases, their actions were not just about personal survival, they were about preserving their people, their faith, and their future. Another key lesson is that divine intervention does not always come in the same form. In 1 and 2 Maccabees, God's presence was seen in miraculous military victories, where vastly outnumbered Jewish forces triumphed over their oppressors. In 3 Maccabees, there were no swords or battles, only prayer, faith, and an unexpected turn of events that led to deliverance. This teaches us that God works in different ways in different situations. Sometimes we are called to fight for what we believe in. Other times, we are called to trust in His plan and let Him work through circumstances beyond our control. These ancient stories are not just relics of the past, they hold profound lessons for today. History has shown time and again that faith is often tested under persecution. From the early Christian martyrs under the Roman Empire, to the Jewish communities who survived centuries of oppression, to modern-day individuals who face discrimination for their beliefs, the struggle for religious freedom is ongoing. The Books of Maccabees remind us that standing firm in our convictions is not always easy, but it is always worth it. In our world today, where people are often pressured to compromise their values for acceptance, the story of the Maccabees serves as a timeless call to courage, integrity, and perseverance. Their unwavering faith changed history, and the same strength of conviction can still change lives today. Whether in times of peace or hardship, the lesson remains the same. Those who trust in God, even in the darkest moments, will always find His presence guiding them forward.